Before billion-dollar franchises and cinematic universes, Marvel experimented wildly with animation. From static panels barely moving to bizarre crossovers and forgotten female leads, these cartoons were strange, bold, and ahead of their time. But most have vanished from memory. Let us count down 20 forgotten Marvel cartoons from the 1960s and 70s you probably never knew existed. Number 20, The Mighty Heroes and Marvel Mashup, 1979. In the late 70s, Marvel quietly explored an animated crossover that would have defied logic and licensing. Titled The Mighty Heroes and Marvel Mashup, this now-forgotten pitch imagined Marvel characters like Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America teaming up with non-Marvel properties like the Mighty Heroes, and even characters from rival studios. The idea was sparked by the popularity of ensemble superhero teams and Saturday morning crossover specials, but legal chaos stopped it cold. The project barely made it past early scripting. Marvel's collaboration with studios like Filmation and Depache Freleng was strained and complicated by intellectual property rights. Still behind closed doors, several concept sketches were drawn showing Thor and Samson fighting side by side and the Thing cracking jokes with Strongman. No full pilot was produced, and the only remnants of this bizarre experiment are buried in Marvel's archives and old licensing notes. This curious crossover was too ambitious for its time. A bold attempt at what would later become common in the MCU era, but back then it was seen as reckless. Fans of both franchises would have loved it, but the legal red tape killed it before it saw air. Number 19. Namor and the Deep Six, late 1970s. Before Aquaman ruled the seas on Saturday morning, Marvel wanted their own undersea epic. The project was Namor and the Deep Six, a proposed animated series centered on Submariner leading a team of oceanic heroes against both surface and deep-sea threats. It would have expanded Namor's mythos and introduced lesser-known Marvel aquatic characters. Originally planned as part of a Marvel Filmation deal in the late 70s, the cartoon would have featured recurring foes like Atuma and introduced Deep Six members like Stingray Tiger Shark and even Triton of the Inhumans. Storyboards showed stunning underwater cityscapes and warships made of coral. But it never went beyond the development stage. The project was shelved when studio interest in superhero cartoons waned, and merchandising was seen as too risky for niche characters. Had it aired, it might have become Marvel's answer to Super Friends with a submerged twist. The potential was vast but forgotten by the time Marvel focused on Spider-Man and Hulk adaptations instead. Today it remains one of Marvel's great what-if animated experiments from the 70s, an underwater superhero squad that never surfaced. Number 18. Marvel Super Adventure Theater, 1977. Long before Disney Plus bundles and syndicated marathons, Marvel tested the waters with a package show called Marvel Super Adventure Theater. This was not a new cartoon, but a curated TV block that recycled clips from the 1966 Marvel Superheroes anthology and the original Spider-Man series. The aim was to reintroduce old content to new audiences with a fresh wraparound format. The show featured a narrator who introduced each segment as though telling grand superhero tales from a magical archive. Every episode included multiple mini-stories featuring Thor, Iron Man, or Captain America, often pulled directly from the limited animation 1966 reels. While visually outdated by 70s standards, the stories still had comic book charm. The show quietly aired in syndicated local markets, often on Saturday mornings, sandwiched between newer shows. But with no original content or notable upgrades, it failed to catch on. Most kids saw it as reruns in disguise. Marvel hoped to spark nostalgia, but instead the show faded into obscurity. Today, Marvel Super Adventure Theater is a forgotten relic of Marvel's transitional years, trying to stay relevant before launching more original series. Number 17. Marvel's Rocket Robin Hood, 1966. Although not a superhero series, Rocket Robin Hood deserves a place on this list for its indirect ties to Marvel. Co-produced by Krantz Films, which also handled the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon, Rocket Robin Hood was a futuristic reimagining of the classic outlaw set in the year 3000. But here's where it gets weird. The animation team and writers behind Rocket Robin Hood were the same people responsible for early Marvel adaptations. In fact, many of the action sequences from Rocket Robin Hood were later repurposed for the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. Entire scenes of swinging and flying were recycled with new characters drawn over old footage. It became a cost-saving tactic that defined the era. Rocket Robin Hood featured laser crossbows, alien sheriffs, and space castles. Robin led his band of merry men against the evil Prince John of NOTT, National Outer Space Terrestrial Territories. The show was weird, imaginative, and unmistakably Canadian, airing on both CBC and in limited U.S. syndication. It may not have featured Marvel characters directly, but its fingerprints are all over early Marvel animation history. Forgotten today, Rocket Robin Hood was once part of the DNA that shaped the earliest superhero cartoons. Number 16. Daredevil: The Animated Trial. 1970s. One of Marvel's earliest attempts to bring its grittiest hero to animation came in the form of Daredevil: The Animated Trial. This proposed pilot from the mid-70s was part legal drama, part superhero action. Marvel envisioned a cartoon that followed Matt Murdock not just as a costumed vigilante, but as a courtroom crusader for justice. This was a radical departure from the usual Monster of the Week format. The show would have focused on courtroom cases each week tied to a villain or Marvel Universe crime. Kingpin, Bullseye, and even a pre-TV Jessica Jones were in early drafts. Daredevil would use both legal wit and rooftop acrobatics to take them down. A rough animatic and several test scripts were developed with Filmation, but TV networks were hesitant. Executives feared that a blind protagonist might confuse younger audiences, and the legal themes were deemed too mature. The project was ultimately shelved and forgotten as Marvel turned back to safer properties like Spider-Woman. Today it stands as a fascinating relic of Marvel's willingness to experiment long before the Netflix era proved Daredevil's potential. This show could have introduced nuanced superhero drama decades earlier, but it never got its day in court. Number 15. The Adventures of the Marvel Heroes, 1976. This unrealized pitch could have changed Marvel animation forever. The Adventures of the Marvel Heroes was an anthology concept designed to spotlight rotating characters like Daredevil, Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye. The format mirrored the Twilight Zone, but each week would have focused on a different Marvel hero's origin or solo mission. Marvel created pitch materials including character sheets and rough storyboards. CBS and NBC reportedly showed initial interest, but hesitated when test audiences struggled to follow rotating casts with no central protagonist. Executives also worried that Marvel's lesser-known characters lacked toy and comic tie-in value, in an era ruled by merchandising that was a death sentence. While the show was never produced, it inspired future formats like Marvel Comics Presents and later Marvel Knights animated projects. The 1976 concept was ahead of its time, trying to introduce the idea of a shared universe before audiences were ready. It died on the pitch table, but the DNA of the idea would resurface decades later in MCU phase-based storytelling. Number 13. The Incredible Hulk. Unaired animated test, 1978. Before the 1982 Incredible Hulk cartoon aired, Marvel quietly produced a short animated test reel in 1978 to gauge network interest. This pilot-style cartoon was designed to capitalize on the success of the Incredible Hulk live-action show starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, but it took a more comic book approach. Bruce Banner's transformation sequence was animated with rotoscoped intensity, and the Hulk's design leaned heavily on Jack Kirby's original proportions. The test included a battle with the Abomination in a construction yard and featured a moody voiceover by Richard Dysart. It had heart but was never aired, and most fans don't even know it existed. Networks hesitated because of tonal confusion. The live-action series was grounded and serious, while the animated pitch leaned colorful and supervillain heavy. Marvel shelved the test and focused efforts on Spider-Woman instead. Number 12. The Thing. Standalone segment, 1979. One of Marvel's strangest experiments came in 1979 when The Thing appeared in a bizarre cartoon segment unrelated to the Fantastic Four. Airing as part of Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, this version imagined Ben Grimm as a nerdy teen named Benji who could transform into the Thing using 2 magic rings and the chant, "Thing Ring Do Your Thing." The transformation scene was wild. Thunder cracks, lightning strikes, and suddenly Benji becomes a gravel-voiced orange brute. But there's no Baxter Building or Doctor Doom. Instead, he fights high school bullies, monsters, and mad scientists while juggling teenage problems. It was Marvel's attempt to connect with the Archie crowd more than comic fans. Fans were baffled and hardcore readers hated it. The show made no effort to follow established Marvel canon and didn't feature other Fantastic Four members. Despite this, it aired for an entire season and even had some merchandise. Today it remains a strange footnote in Marvel's animated history, a cartoon that took a beloved character and reimagined him as a teen sitcom superhero. Number 11. Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, 1979. In what might be the oddest crossover in Marvel animation history, The Thing shared a cartoon block with the Flintstones in Fred and Barney Meet the Thing. The title suggested a team-up between Bedrock's favorite cavemen and Marvel's rock-skinned hero, but in reality the two never met on screen. The show was a package of unrelated segments with Fred and Barney in one half and The Thing in the other. Produced by Deepashi Freyling in cooperation with Marvel, the cartoon baffled viewers with its surreal tone. The Thing segments followed a teenage version of Ben Grimm who transformed into the Rocky hero using magical rings. Meanwhile, the Fred and Barney parts continued in typical prehistoric sitcom fashion. No crossover episodes, no Marvel villains, no logic. This strange pairing was purely a marketing stunt aimed at blending audiences from both franchises. It confused fans but still ran for 13 episodes. Critics blasted it for dumbing down Marvel lore, but it holds a cult legacy as one of the most outlandish reimaginings in superhero animation history. Number 9. Spider-Woman, 1979. Marvel made a bold move in 1979 by giving Jessica Drew her own animated series Spider-Woman. At the time, no female Marvel character had been given such spotlight. Designed partly to preemptively protect the copyright on the name Spider-Woman, the show also aimed to tap into rising demand for female superheroes. Jessica worked as the editor of Justice magazine by day and transformed into a web-slinging superhero by night. The show was notable for combining superhero action with science fiction and even horror. One episode featured Dracula, while another had giant Egyptian gods attacking Earth. Jessica used unique powers: energy blasts, gliding flight, and hypnosis, differing from her male counterpart. The animation was typical of the era, limited but stylized. Episodes leaned heavily into weird plots and voiceovers. Although the series only ran for 16 episodes, it paved the way for future heroines like She-Ra and paved ground for the MCU's later revival of Jessica Drew. Forgotten by most modern audiences, Spider-Woman was Marvel's first animated female lead, and she soared higher than anyone expected. Number 8. Submariner, 1966. Part of the Marvel Superheroes anthology in 1966, Submariner introduced kids to Namor, the hot-headed half-Atlantean prince. Voiced with a regal growl, Namor starred in his own animated segments battling surface dwellers and ancient underwater enemies. Unlike other segments which focused on land-based action, this one was all about oceanic kingdoms and environmental conflict. Namor fought alongside Lady Dorma and against villains like Bira and Atuma. The animation was almost non-existent, just repurposed comic book panels with mouth flaps and occasional movement. But the stories carried weight. The dialogue remained faithful to Stan Lee's writing, and Namor's Shakespearean speech patterns gave it a mythic tone. The Submariner segment was groundbreaking in giving screen time to an anti-hero, a character not strictly good or evil, but driven by his own code. Forgotten today, it helped establish Namor's status in the Marvel mythos long before he'd reappear in modern media. It might have been crude, but it was a deep dive into character complexity before it was cool. Number 7. Captain America, 1966. In 1966, the Marvel Superheroes anthology also featured Captain America segments that brought Steve Rogers' patriotic battles to life. With his iconic shield ricocheting across panels, Cap fought the Red Skull Baron Zemo and even Hydra in stories pulled directly from the comics. The animation was minimal, but the storytelling packed a punch. The theme song became instantly memorable. When Captain America throws his mighty shield, and Cap's moral clarity stood in stark contrast to Cold War cynicism. He embodied loyalty, sacrifice, and wartime resilience at a time when Vietnam-era disillusionment was creeping into popular culture. This version of Cap focused heavily on World War II flashbacks and Nazi punching action. His stories were serialized, meaning each week followed a single arc, which was rare for cartoons at the time. The show wasn't flashy, but it helped reintroduce Captain America to a generation that had forgotten him post-war. Today, it's a relic, and that theme song remains the most enduring part of this otherwise overlooked cartoon chapter. Number 6. Thor, 1966. The Thunder God arrived on television in 1966 as part of the Marvel Superheroes anthology. With his winged helmet, enchanted hammer, and Asgardian arrogance, Thor became the first Norse deity to get a weekly TV showcase, even if the animation barely moved. Each segment told epic tales drawn directly from Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's source material. Thor battled Loki, Enchantress, Absorbing Man, and even Odin's Wrath. The language was high fantasy, Shakespearean, and operatic, making Thor feel more like mythology class than a Saturday morning cartoon. His transformation from Donald Blake into Thor came with thunderclaps and classic narration. Although crude, the show delivered surprisingly rich lore. Kids learned about Yggdrasil Heimdall and the Rainbow Bridge long before the MCU made them famous. But over time, this Thor faded from memory, replaced by more polished adaptations. This was the hammer's first swing on screen, primitive but powerful. Number 5. Iron Man, 1966. Before Tony Stark became a billion-dollar box office name, he debuted on television in the Marvel Superheroes anthology series in 1966. This version of Iron Man was a motion comic segment featuring direct lifts from Don Heck's comic panels and a jazzy theme song that proudly declared, "He's a man on a mission armed with repulsor rays." In this early incarnation, Stark's origin story, injured in Vietnam and forced to build a suit of armor to survive, remained surprisingly intact. He battled villains like Crimson Dynamo Mandarin and Titanium Man with help from Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan. But the animation was static. The character barely moved, and most of the action came from comic panels sliding across the screen while a narrator filled in the blanks. Despite its limited visuals, the Iron Man cartoon helped define Tony's personality for a new generation. He was suave, cunning, and technologically driven. Forgotten today by most modern fans, it was one of Marvel's earliest media attempts to capture the duality of a genius inventor fighting personal demons. Long before Robert Downey Jr., there was this stoic animated Stark clanking through Saturday morning battles. Number 4. The Incredible Hulk, 1966. Also part of the Marvel Superheroes 1966 lineup was The Incredible Hulk. While crude in animation, it captured the tragedy of Bruce Banner more honestly than some later adaptations. The show emphasized the duality of man versus monster, with Banner's voice quaking over panels that showed Hulk smashing tanks or leaping across cliffs. Each episode focused on the internal conflict, Banner's struggle to control the beast within. Hulk's foes included General Ross the Leader and Tyrannus, and while the action was limited to jerky comic panel transitions, the writing tried to preserve the emotional weight of the comic. Banner's isolation and scientific guilt stood out even when paired with simplistic backgrounds. The theme music was oddly upbeat given the somber tone, and Hulk often narrated his own pain in dramatic inner monologues. While overlooked today, the show introduced kids to a monster with a heart. Its tragic tone made it unique among its 1966 counterparts and laid groundwork for the more serious live-action show that would follow over a decade later. Number 2. Spider-Man, 1967. Arguably the most remembered entry on this list, and yet still deeply underappreciated, the original Spider-Man cartoon from 1967 set the tone for Peter Parker's animated legacy. With its unforgettable theme song and surreal backgrounds, it lasted 3 seasons and remains a cult classic. Peter juggled school life, crime fighting, and rent in a world that felt weirdly abstract and psychedelic. The early episodes were grounded. He faced comic villains like Vulture, Electro, and Mysterio. But by season 2, the show took a turn toward the bizarre. Alien invaders, cosmic portals, and strange dimensional rifts became common. Animators reused stock footage liberally, and at times entire action scenes were lifted from Rocket Robin Hood to save money. But despite the shortcuts, the show captured the spirit of Spider-Man. His wit, his struggle, his loneliness. His voice was sincere, not snarky. This was Spidey before quips became currency. Modern fans remember the memes and music but forget how influential this show was. It was the blueprint for animated superhero storytelling. Without it, there'd be no Spider-Man, the animated series, no Into the Spider-Verse, and possibly no pop culture Spider-Man at all. Number 1. The Marvel Superheroes, 1966. Topping the list is the source from which so many forgotten gems sprang. The Marvel Superheroes was Marvel's very first animated series, a bold experiment that used existing comic panels minimally animated with limited movement but maximum drama. It featured 5 rotating heroes: Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, and Submariner. Produced by Grant Ray Lawrence Animation and syndicated across North America, it ran 65 episodes total. Each episode was really 3 shorter segments focusing on serialized battles and origin stories. What it lacked in animation, it made up for in narration, bold voice acting, and faithfulness to the comics. The visuals were crude, but the stories were pure Stan Lee, lifted straight from the pages. Each hero had a catchy intro theme. The show didn't pretend to be subtle or cinematic. It was raw comic book television. It paved the way for all Marvel cartoons to come and kept characters like Cap and Thor alive in pop culture during a time when superhero comics were in decline. Forgotten now by many, this was the big bang of Marvel animation, where it all began. Before CGI spectacles and Disney domination, Marvel's animated universe was scrappy, weird, and wildly experimental. These forgotten cartoons laid the foundation for everything that came after. They dared to be different in a world that wasn't ready. Which of these relics surprised you most? Let us know and subscribe for more retro revelations.